August 10th, 1943. If one army doctor had stayed silent for just 24 more hours, General George Smith Patton might have led the invasion of France, entered Paris at the head of American forces, and rewritten his legacy before the world ever learned what he had done in a military hospital in Sicily. But that doctor did speak. He filed the report. And in a war already filled with disaster and triumph, the most feared American general in Europe suddenly found himself facing a different kind of enemy. Not the Germans, not the Italians, not even the brutal mathematics of war. His enemy was scandal. His enemy was his own temper. And what George Smith Patton did in those sweltering Sicilian hospital tents nearly ended his career before his greatest victories had even begun. This is what happened next. They called him Old Blood and Guts. General George Smith Patton, the man with the ivory-handled pistols, the polished helmet, the fierce stare, and the language that could strip paint off a tank. He believed war was motion, violence, shock, relentless pressure. He believed the side that moved faster, hit harder, and kept attacking would win. And by the summer of 1943, that belief had already made him one of the most recognizable American commanders in the war. The Allies had landed in Sicily in July 1943. It was supposed to be a proving ground, a chance to smash Axis forces in the Mediterranean, secure sea lanes, and prepare for the eventual invasion of mainland Europe. But it was also a test of personalities. British General Bernard Montgomery on one side, George Smith Patton on the other. Two men with giant egos, incompatible styles, and absolutely no interest in sharing glory. Officially, Patton's 7th Army had a supporting role. Unofficially, Old Blood and Guts had no intention of playing supporting anything. The campaign became a race, a brutal, dusty, dangerous race across Sicily. Patton wanted Palermo, then Messina. He wanted headlines. He wanted victory. He wanted to prove that American troops could move as fast and fight as hard as anyone in the world. And he did. His forces drove hard across the island. They took Palermo. They pushed east. They fought heat, mines, snipers, air attacks and exhaustion. And through it all, George Smith Patton demanded more speed, more aggression, more forward movement. Rest was weakness. Hesitation was failure. Fear was contagious. In Patton's mind, an army that stopped moving started dying. That philosophy made him brilliant. It also made him dangerous. By August, Sicily was an oven. The heat was crushing. Dust coated everything. Men had been fighting for weeks with little sleep and constant tension. Some were physically wounded, others were breaking in ways that could not be seen. Today, we call it combat trauma, battle fatigue, post-traumatic stress. In 1943, many officers had cruder words for it: weakness, cowardice, lack of nerve, and George Smith Patton had absolutely no patience for it. On August 3rd, 1943, Patton visited an evacuation hospital near Nicosia, Sicily. He liked visiting hospitals. He believed it inspired the wounded. He believed his presence reminded soldiers why they were fighting. He moved through the tents, speaking to men with broken bones, bullet wounds, burns, shrapnel tears. He congratulated them, praised them, sometimes pinned medals on them. To Patton, a visible wound was proof of courage. A man hit in battle had paid his price in blood. Then he came to Private Charles H. Cool. Cool wasn't visibly wounded. No blood, no bandages, no missing limb. He was sitting on a stool, trembling, exhausted, hollow-eyed. He had reached the end of what his mind could absorb. When Patton asked what was wrong, Cool reportedly said he guessed he just couldn't take it anymore. That was the wrong answer. The worst possible answer. George Smith Patton exploded. His face hardened. His voice rose. He called the soldier a coward. Called him yellow. Said men were dying at the front and this bastard was sitting there with the jitters. Then Patton slapped him. Hard. The young soldier fell back. Patton struck him again. Ordered him out of the hospital. Told the doctors not to admit that kind of man. Told the staff to send him back to the front. Everyone in the tent froze. Doctors, nurses, corpsmen, wounded men. They had just watched a 4-star general, one of the most famous soldiers in America, physically assault a soldier suffering from psychological collapse. Patton stormed out, still furious, still muttering about cowardice, but the damage had been done. And then, unbelievably, it happened again. August 10th, 1943. Another hospital, another visit, another exhausted soldier. This time, it was Private Paul G. Bennett. Like Cool, he showed no obvious physical wound. Like Cool, he was suffering from what doctors understood as battle fatigue. Like Cool, he gave Patton an answer that triggered the general's deepest contempt. Patton demanded to know what was wrong. Bennett said it was his nerves. That was all it took. Patton erupted again. He cursed the soldier, called him a coward, a son of a bitch, grabbed him by the collar, slapped him, threatened to have him shot if he didn't get back to the front. Witnesses would later remember the scene in stunned silence, not because tempers in war were unusual. Tempers were common. Screaming was common. Harsh discipline was common. But this was different. This was a general striking a shattered enlisted man in a hospital tent and treating invisible wounds as moral failure. This time, people decided they couldn't just let it go. One of the doctors, horrified by what he had seen, filed a formal complaint through medical channels. That complaint moved upward, quietly at first, then urgently. Because the man being accused wasn't a colonel or a division commander. It was George Smith Patton, one of the Army's stars, one of the few American generals who inspired fear in the enemy and awe in the press. A scandal involving Patton wasn't just a disciplinary matter, it was a strategic problem. The report reached General Omar Bradley. Then it reached General Dwight David Eisenhower. Ike had known Patton for years. He understood him, respected him, sometimes admired him, sometimes dreaded him. Eisenhower knew Patton could do things other commanders couldn't. He knew old blood and guts could take a formation, ignite it, and make it move with terrifying force. But he also knew Patton was volatile, emotional, theatrical, capable of greatness and self-destruction in the same afternoon. Eisenhower had spent much of the war managing allies, egos, political expectations, and fragile coalitions. Now, he had to manage George Smith Patton again. The timing could not have been worse. The Allies were planning the next phases of the war, Italy, then France. The invasion of Western Europe was coming. Every senior command assignment mattered. Public trust mattered. Political support mattered. And if word got out that America's most aggressive field commander had slapped hospitalized soldiers suffering from battle trauma, the outrage could be enormous. Congress would react. Newspapers would react. Families of soldiers would react. The War Department would react. Patton's career, in an instant, was balancing over an abyss. Eisenhower summoned him. When George Smith Patton arrived, he was still defiant. He didn't deny what he had done. He didn't apologize immediately. He explained it, rationalized it. In Patton's mind, armies could not function if fear was legitimized. If soldiers with no visible wounds were allowed to collapse and leave the line, then others might follow. Panic might spread. Fighting spirit might erode. He saw himself as defending discipline, defending the army, defending victory itself. Eisenhower was not persuaded. The Supreme Commander listened. Then he told Patton exactly how serious this was. He said Patton would apologize. Personally, to the soldiers, to the doctors, to the medical staff. No excuses. No speeches about cowardice. No philosophical lectures about fear in combat. A direct apology. Eisenhower also made something else clear. If this incident became public, if political pressure exploded, even he might not be able to save him. That hit Patton harder than the scandal itself. Because George Smith Patton craved command the way other men craved air. He wanted combat, glory, victory, history. He did not want a desk. He did not want obscurity. He did not want to be remembered as the general who slapped a broken soldier and got himself buried before the decisive campaigns of the war. For all his ego, for all his rage, Patton understood one thing in that moment with absolute clarity. He had gone too far. So he did something almost no one expected. He apologized. He went to the hospitals. He stood before doctors, nurses, corpsmen and wounded soldiers. He admitted he had been wrong. He said he had acted hastily, improperly. He apologized to the men he had humiliated. For Patton, this was agony. Public humility did not come naturally to him. It may have been the hardest order Eisenhower ever gave him. But he obeyed it. And still, the danger wasn't over. Because now the question became bigger than apology. Could Patton still be trusted with major command? Could the Allies put one of the most important invasions in history into the hands of a man whose temper might at any moment explode into scandal? Could Eisenhower risk the coalition, the press, the politics, the war itself, on George Smith Patton? There were powerful voices who thought the answer was no. Some officers believed Patton should be relieved permanently. Others said he should be sent home, quietly, respectfully, buried in a training command where he could do no more damage. Medical officers were furious. Some senior commanders were disgusted. Even officers who admired Patton's combat brilliance wondered if he had finally disqualified himself from higher responsibility. A general who cannot control himself, they argued, cannot be trusted to control an army. Eisenhower faced an impossible choice. He could sacrifice Patton and demonstrate that no one, not even America's most famous field commander, was above discipline. Or he could protect Patton, absorb the criticism, and hold on to a man he believed might still be indispensable when the real invasion of Europe began. It was a gamble either way. Remove him, and the Allies lose one of their most dangerous commanders. Keep him, and the Allies risk a public scandal that could detonate at any time. Ike chose a third path, a political path, a military path, a brutal compromise. George Smith Patton would not lead the coming invasion of France, not openly, not at first. Instead, he would be sidelined. Temporarily, quietly, publicly diminished but not destroyed. He would disappear from frontline command just long enough for the scandal to cool, just long enough for the army to contain the story, just long enough for Eisenhower to preserve him for a different purpose. That purpose turned out to be one of the greatest deceptions of World War II, because by late 1943 and early 1944, the Allies were preparing Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. And they needed the Germans to believe the main landing would happen somewhere else, somewhere closer to Germany, somewhere more obvious. Pas de Calais. To sell that lie, they needed a commander the Germans feared, a commander whose very presence suggested a massive offensive, a commander the enemy would watch. George Smith Patton was perfect. So while he was denied the field command he desperately wanted, Patton was given command of a phantom army. 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, an army that barely existed, inflatable tanks, dummy landing craft, fake radio traffic, imaginary divisions, a theatre of war built from smoke, canvas, signal chatter, and reputation. And at the centre of that illusion stood George Smith Patton. The Germans bought it. They believed Patton was being held back for the main blow. They believed the real invasion would come where Patton was. They believed Normandy might be a feint. Even after June 6, 1944, even after Allied forces were ashore and fighting in France, German commanders hesitated because they still feared Patton's phantom army would strike elsewhere. It was one of the greatest strategic deceptions in modern warfare, and it worked because Patton was still Patton. Think about how close history came to losing that. If Eisenhower had fully removed him after Sicily, Patton would not have played that role. If the slapping scandal had gone fully public at the wrong moment, Patton might have been politically radioactive. If the army had decided that his volatility outweighed his value, the Germans might not have feared the phantom army in the same way. And if German reserves had been shifted more quickly toward Normandy, if armoured divisions had been committed sooner and in greater force, the cost on those beaches could have been catastrophic. That is the paradox of George Smith Patton. His greatest weakness nearly destroyed the very reputation that later helped save Allied lives. After Normandy, once the breakout came, Eisenhower finally unleashed him. Third Army roared across France, and it roared exactly the way Patton always believed war should be fought. Fast, violent, continuous. Cities fell. German formations collapsed. Fuel ran low because Patton's advance was outrunning the supply system itself. He crossed rivers, smashed defences, pivoted armies and turned manoeuvre into shock. When Bastogne needed relief in the winter of 1944, it was Patton who turned Third Army north through ice and chaos and reached the trapped Americans. Again and again, the general who nearly destroyed his career in Sicily became the general called upon when speed, aggression and audacity were needed most. But the Sicily scandal never really disappeared. It stayed there, in the background, a stain, a warning. Proof that genius and instability can live inside the same man. George Smith Patton was not a simple hero. He was not a neat legend. He was brilliant, profane, inspiring, ruthless, theatrical, exhausting, and sometimes shockingly wrong. He could see battle with astonishing clarity. He could also fail to see the damage inside a soldier's mind. He understood fear as something to be conquered by force of will. He did not fully understand that some men were not cowards at all. They were broken by the same war he demanded they survive. That failure matters, because battle fatigue was real. It was not weakness. It was not moral collapse. It was the human nervous system pushed past endurance by shellfire, death, sleep deprivation, terror, and the constant possibility of obliteration. Men shattered under that pressure not because they lacked courage, but because they had reached a limit beyond which the body and brain simply would not go. In slapping those soldiers, Patton revealed something important and troubling about his character. His worship of toughness had blinded him to suffering he could not physically see. And yet history did not end there. Eisenhower did not destroy him. He contained him, redirected him, used him, saved him in a sense from himself. And Patton, for all his fury, accepted that temporary humiliation because somewhere inside him he knew there would be another battlefield, another chance, another campaign where only movement and nerve and violence mattered. He waited. He played the role assigned to him. Then, when the gates finally opened, he surged through them like a man trying to outrun the memory of Sicily itself. Did the two slaps nearly destroy Patton? Absolutely. Did they almost cost the Allies one of their most valuable commanders? Yes. Did they reveal a darkness in him that cannot be ignored? Also yes. But they also exposed something else. How fragile wartime greatness really is. How one moment, one act of rage, one failure of judgment can place an entire legacy on the brink of collapse. George Smith Patton is remembered now for the dash across France, the relief of Bastogne, the profanity, the pistols, the relentless hunger for victory. But in August 1943, none of that was guaranteed. In August 1943, George Smith Patton was one bad headline away from irrelevance, and the man who understood that best was Dwight Eisenhower. Ike never forgot what Patton was: a risk, a weapon, a problem, a genius. He didn't excuse him. He managed him, because that was Eisenhower's gift. He understood that winning a world war meant not only defeating the enemy, but somehow keeping together a coalition of nations, egos, ambitions, scandals, and unstable brilliance. Patton was part of that unstable brilliance, too dangerous to trust completely, too valuable to discard. That is why the story of the Sicily slapping incidents matters so much. Not because it is comfortable, it isn't. Not because it fits a patriotic myth, it doesn't. But because it shows how close history came to changing course on something as small and as huge as a general losing his temper in a hospital tent. No Third Army legend, no phantom army deception with the same power, no Patton roaring across France in the summer of 1944, no relief of Bastogne under his command, no final image of old blood and guts as America's most aggressive battlefield general. All of it almost vanished in Sicily. 2 slaps. That was the margin. 2 moments of anger that almost buried one of the most famous soldiers of the 20th century before his legend was fully written. 2 moments that exposed his flaws more clearly than any victory ever could. 2 moments that forced Eisenhower to decide whether George Smith Patton was finished or merely dangerous. And in choosing not to end him, Eisenhower changed the war. George Smith Patton would go on to become immortal in military history. But immortality came close to dying in a hospital tent in Sicily, surrounded by men already wounded by war in ways Patton did not know how to respect. That is the truth behind the legend. Before he became the unstoppable general racing through France, before Bastogne, before the glory, before the speeches in the history books, Patton nearly lost everything because he mistook trauma for cowardice and rage for leadership. And maybe that is why his story still grips people now, because it is not clean. It is not simple. It is not the story of a flawless warrior marching from triumph to triumph. It is the story of a man who could inspire armies and still fail utterly at understanding the men inside them. A man whose brilliance was real, whose flaws were real, whose career survived not because he was innocent, but because history decided he was still useful. That is colder than heroism, but it is often how war works. George Smith Patton was saved because the Allies believed they still needed him. And they were right. But the price of saving him was this permanent contradiction at the centre of his legend. The same man who led with terrifying confidence could also bully the broken. The same commander who helped destroy Hitler's empire could not always recognise the human wreckage war left in its own soldiers. The same general who became a symbol of American aggression and victory nearly became a cautionary tale before his greatest battles even began. August 1943 was supposed to be a footnote, a scandal contained, an embarrassment handled behind closed doors. Instead, it became one of the most revealing moments of Patton's life, because it showed exactly who he was when stripped of battlefield myth. Not just the warrior, the man, proud, explosive, gifted, blind in crucial ways, and terrifyingly close to self-destruction. He survived it.